The note didn't fall. It shook. A tiny, trembling piece of paper slipped through the narrow gap of my driver door, landing against my boot like it carried its own heartbeat. And when I bent down to pick it up, the first words melted the cold right out of my chest. Help us before he finds us. Tell me, what would you have done if a stranger begged you for salvation without even showing their face? The highway around me was silent, stretching into the darkness like an empty promise. My rig idled, engine humming low, warm diesel drifting in slow waves through the night air. But something felt wrong, so wrong the cold felt heavier, like the darkness was watching me instead of the other way around. And somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, someone was waiting for my answer. I turned the note over, reading it again and again, fighting the strange tremor crawling up my spine. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like each letter had been written with hands that couldn't stop shaking. At the bottom corner, smeared faintly with tears or sweat, was a name, Maya, a name fighting to stay alive. I opened my door slowly, stepping out into the cold with a caution that only years on the road can teach. Maya? I called softly into the dim glow of the truck stop's dying neon sign. My breath fogged the air, dissolving into the frost as I scanned the shadows around the pumps, the dumpsters, the empty road. No answer, just the quiet throb of fear hanging in the night. I took a few steps forward, boots grinding on the gravel, and that's when I saw movement, just a flicker, beneath my trailer. Something small, someone small, curled in tight, hiding like a cornered animal. A thin voice broke through the silence. Please, don't let him see me. And my heart dropped into my stomach. I crouched down slowly, lowering myself to the ground so I wouldn't scare her. There she was, Maya, a girl no older than 12, dirty streaks across her cheeks, hair tangled, eyes wide with terror so raw it hurt to look at her. She clutched her knees to her chest, trembling so violently I could hear her teeth clicking in the cold. Before I could speak, she reached out a small hand toward me, hesitant, hopeful, broken. He's looking for us, she whispered. Please don't let him find me. And in that moment, staring into the terrified eyes of a child who had run out of places to hide, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever was coming, I wasn't letting it touch her. Her note was still in my hand when I stepped out of the cab again, the cold night slashing across my face like a reminder that whatever I had just stepped into was bigger and darker than I first thought. The paper trembled between my fingers, not from the wind, but from the weight of the words she had written. Help us before he finds us. That wasn't a warning. That was a countdown. And somewhere in the night, the thing she feared was already moving. The truck stop around me felt different now. The neon sign flickered in erratic pulses, casting jagged shadows across the cracked pavement like the ground itself was trying to speak. The air smelled like cold diesel and danger, heavy enough to feel in the back of my throat. I scanned the perimeter, behind the pumps, between the dumpsters, near the edge of the dark highway, searching for any sign of her, a silhouette, a breath, anything. The silence that answered felt predatory. A soft rustle broke through the stillness, so faint it could have been a stray plastic bag, but something in me tightened. That wasn't the sound of trash. That was the sound of someone trying not to be heard. I followed it, slow and deliberate, my boots crunching through gravel that seemed far too loud. As I rounded the back of my trailer, the shadows shifted, and two terrified eyes stared back at me from behind the rear tires. She was there, the same girl who had slipped me the note, small, trembling, barely more than a silhouette in the dim light. She pressed herself against the metal, hugging her knees, her breath coming out in sharp, uneven bursts. Her hair was messy, her face streaked with dirt and dried tears. When our eyes met, she didn't scream, she didn't run. She just shook her head violently, whispering through cracked lips, "Don't let him see me, please." I crouched down slowly, careful not to startle her, letting her see my hands were empty. Her fear was raw, the kind that comes from someone who's been hunted long enough to know hope is fragile. "You're safe for now," I murmured, but her eyes darted past me into the parking lot, as if safety was a word that had burned her before. She swallowed hard, trying to speak, but the words died in her throat. She closed her eyes tight, as if bracing for something awful to appear. A sudden beam of headlights cut across the lot, sweeping past the pumps like a spotlight searching for prey. She flinched so violently her shoulder hit the metal rim of the tire. That told me everything I needed to know. Whoever she was hiding from wasn't guessing. He was close, too close. And the moment those lights hit the far wall of the truck stop, I felt a shift in the air, a tension that coiled like a snake preparing to strike. I stepped between her and the parking lot, blocking the light, shielding her with my body. She reached out suddenly, gripping the hem of my jacket with shaking fingers, not for support but for survival. Her voice broke into a whisper, barely audible over the hum of my idling engine. "He's looking for me. she said, "and he always finds us." The headlights dimmed, the engine in the distance growled, and a sickening chill crawled up my spine. "Not tonight," I whispered back, and I meant it. I didn't start the engine yet. The cab was too quiet, too heavy, as if the night itself were waiting for me to make the wrong move. The note sat on the dashboard, its edges trembling from the cold air slipping through the cracked window. I kept reading the words over and over again, hearing her voice in every stroke of ink. "Please, he's coming. Don't let him find us." That wasn't a message. It was a lifeline thrown at the last second by someone drowning in fear. I needed to find her, and fast. People don't slip notes into truck doors unless they believe they're seconds away from disappearing. I scanned the truck stop through the windshield, the neon sign flickering over puddles of dirty water, the empty road stretching into blackness, and the abandoned motel rooms across the lot where yellow curtains swayed from air leaks. Any of those shadows could be hiding her, or him. I opened the door and stepped out quietly, the gravel crunching under my boots like broken glass. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of distant power lines, the faint buzz of the neon, the sharp whistle of cold wind brushing past the fuel pumps. I walked slowly toward the back of my rig, trusting my instincts to lead me. The night pressed on my shoulders like a weight, urging me to stay vigilant, because someone out here wasn't running, they were hunting. As I rounded the back of the trailer, I stopped. Something shifted behind the dumpster near the edge of the lot. A tiny shuffle, a breath, a soft whimper too fragile to belong to anything but a scared human being. I moved closer, lowering myself slowly, not wanting to startle whoever was hiding. The shadows were thick, but I could see a small shape curled behind the metal bin, shaking violently like they were trying to disappear into the concrete itself. "Hey," I whispered, easing down to one knee. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." For a second, silence. Then two terrified eyes appeared from the darkness, wide, desperate, and shining with tears. A girl, maybe 10 or 11, clutching her arms around her body as if she were holding her own ribs together. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, the kind that comes after too many hours of fear. She looked at me like I was the last chance she had left in this world. She didn't come forward. She didn't speak. She just shook her head violently, whispering so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "He's close, please. Don't let him see me." The words felt like ice water running down my spine, not because of the fear in her voice, but because of the certainty. That wasn't the whisper of someone scared of the dark. That was someone terrified of a man whose face she knew too well. I crouched lower, making myself smaller, hands open so she could see I wasn't a threat. "You're safe with me," I murmured. "But I need to move you. I need to get you somewhere he can't reach." Her eyes widened, panic flickering like a spark caught in dry leaves. "No, no, he'll follow. He always follows." She backed up until her spine hit the dumpster, curling tighter, fighting her own instinct to trust. This wasn't fear. This was survival shaped by experience. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, coming from behind the motel. The girl's breath hitched, her fingers gripping the gravel. Her gaze snapped past me toward the sound, and she trembled so violently that the dumpster rattled. Whoever was out there wasn't looking. He was searching, and he was getting closer. The moment I stepped out of the cab again, the cold slapped me hard across the face, snapping every sense awake. The truck stop looked different now, emptier, darker, like the night itself had swallowed something it shouldn't have. My boots echoed against the pavement as I walked around the front of my rig, the air too still for a place that should have had wind, engines, or life. And then I saw it. The tiny piece of paper on the ground, half crumpled, the same handwriting I'd seen through my driver door. I bent down, heart thudding, and picked it up. Her message, "Help us before he finds us," was smeared, like it had been held by shaking hands. But the real chill came from the fresh set of footprints leading away from the truck, small, hurried, and uneven. She hadn't run far. Someone, or something, had interrupted her. My stomach tightened as I followed the tracks toward the back of the lot, the sound of my own breathing growing louder than the wind. The neon sign behind me flickered violently, casting erratic flashes of red and blue across the asphalt. In one of the flickers I saw movement, a shadow slipping between the abandoned fuel pumps, fast enough to vanish but slow enough to prove it wasn't my imagination. My pulse kicked hard. She wasn't alone out there, and whatever she was running from wasn't far behind. As I approached the far side of the station, I heard something, a whisper of breathing, soft, uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. I moved slowly, stepping between the pumps, the cold fog creeping low across the ground. Then I saw her, kneeling behind a trash bin, fingers pressed to her lips, eyes wide with terror. Her chest rose and fell in fast, panicked bursts. She wasn't hiding from me. She was hiding from something behind me. I crouched beside her, keeping my voice barely above a breath. "Where is he?" She didn't answer with words. She just lifted her trembling hand and pointed behind my truck toward the row of dark, boarded-up motel units. I followed her line of sight. A door at the far end of the row was cracked open, the light inside flickering, shifting like someone was pacing behind it. She clutched my sleeve, her nails digging into the fabric. "He saw me leave," she whispered, the words breaking apart as tears streamed down her cheek. "He said if I called for help again, he'd make me disappear." Her voice cracked completely on that last word. Disappear. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise she'd heard before, maybe more than once. I put my hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "I'm not letting anything happen to you," I said, grounding my voice, anchoring her fear to something solid. Her breath hitched, but she nodded, trusting me with a kind of desperation only people running for their lives ever show. I looked back toward the broken motel door, the flickering light trembling like a warning. Something was waiting inside that room, and I wasn't walking away. The silence inside my cab felt heavier the moment I unfolded the note completely. The trembling handwriting belonged to someone who had written it in pure panic, each stroke shaky, rushed, desperate. My eyes followed the words again, slower this time, letting the weight of them sink in. "Help us before he finds us." Not me, us. That meant someone else was out there, someone young, someone vulnerable, someone she was willing to risk everything to protect. The diesel hum below my feet suddenly sounded like a heartbeat, mine, or hers, or both. I lowered the note and looked toward the empty stretch of the truck stop. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting broken light across the pavement. Nothing moved, but that didn't comfort me. It made everything worse. Quiet like this never meant peace. It meant danger was hiding, patient, calculating, close enough to breathe the same air. Whoever she was running from hadn't given up. Predators like that never do. And if she risked approaching a stranger's truck in the dead of night, he had to be close. I opened the door quietly and stepped down into the cold. The air cut through my jacket like a blade, sharp enough to sting my lungs. My boots touched the gravel with a crunch that felt too loud in the dead silence. I glanced around the edges of the trailers, scanning the shadows beneath each one. My trailer loomed behind me, towering and still, the metal surface glinting faintly under the neon light. Somewhere out there, she was watching, hiding, waiting for someone to choose to do the right damn thing. I walked slowly toward the back of my rig, every step measured, every breath controlled. The fog rolled low along the ground, swirling around my boots like something alive. The moment I turned the corner of the trailer, I saw it. A faint movement. A small silhouette pressed into the darkness, curled tight between my tires and the cold steel frame. She flinched when my shadow fell over her, eyes wide, terrified, ready to run or disappear or shatter. But when she recognized me, her shoulders collapsed with relief. She crawled forward hesitantly, still holding herself like someone who expected the world to hit her for breathing too loudly. She kept one hand behind her, shielding the small shape tucked close to her side. A boy, no older than 7, his face buried in her coat, trembling from fear, or cold, or both. She pulled him closer, eyes darting around the parking lot, as if expecting a monster to burst from the darkness any second. "He's here," she whispered, voice cracking. "He followed us. Please, don't let him find us." For a second I just kneeled there with them, the fog creeping between us, the night breathing down our necks. Her fear wasn't the kind you exaggerate, it was the kind you earn, the kind carved into bone and memory. I put my hand gently on her shoulder and felt her flinch, but she didn't pull away. That alone told me everything. "You're safe for now," I whispered. "Both of you. I'm not letting anything happen to you." Her hands tightened around the boy, her breath shaking like her lungs were fighting to keep her upright. But then something shifted in the distance, a faint scrape of metal, soft enough to miss unless your nerves were stretched thin. Her head snapped up instantly, eyes wide, breath caught. She didn't have to say a word. I felt it too. The air changed, the night tensed, and somewhere in the dark, the man she feared had just stepped closer. The moment I stepped out of the cab again, the cold slapped me with a force that made the night feel suddenly hostile. The truck stop had gone unnaturally still, like the air itself was warning me I was too late to notice something crucial. I looked toward my driver's side door, the place where the note had been slipped earlier, and a shiver crawled down my spine. The gravel beneath it was disturbed, smeared with hurried footprints that weren't there before. Someone had come close, too close. I followed the footprints with my flashlight, the beam slicing through the fog in thin, trembling lines. The prints zigzagged across the lot like someone had been dragged or chased. My chest tightened as the trail led toward the narrow service alley behind the old diner. The neon sign flickered violently, casting broken blue light across the pavement as if the world was blinking in fear. And then I heard it, A faint thud, a struggle, a muffled cry that didn't belong to the wind. I moved toward the sound, slow but ready, my boots crunching over glass and gravel. The alley opened into a pocket of darkness where the street lamp had long since died. That's where I saw her, Mara, pinned against the back wall by the same man whose shadow had been stalking the lot. Her hair was tangled, her face pale with terror, her hands gripping his wrists as he tried to force her still. His body blocked her path, his rage blocked her breath. She saw me first. Her eyes widened with a desperate spark of recognition, and that tiny flicker of hope cut deeper than any scream could. "Please," she whispered through shaking lips. "Don't let him." Her voice cracked before she could finish. The man snapped his head toward me, fury burning in his eyes like he'd been caught in the middle of a ritual he believed he had every right to perform. "Back off," he snarled, tightening his grip on her arms. "This is none of your business." I stepped deeper into the alley, not raising my voice, not rushing him, just letting him see the truth in my stance. He wasn't dragging her anywhere tonight. He wasn't disappearing with her into the dark. Not while my truck sat 15 steps away, still humming like a reminder of the promise I'd made the moment I read her shaking handwriting. His jaw clenched, and he shoved her hard against the wall, using her body like a shield against me. Mara gasped, dropping to her knees, her hands bracing the ground as pain rippled through her. The man's shadow loomed over her as he tried to yank her back up, but she resisted with the last scraps of strength she had left. "Stop," she begged, her voice barely air. "Please, just stop." He didn't. He never would. Men like him don't stop because someone asks. They stop when someone bigger stands in the doorway between them and the darkness they think they own. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the trembling note still clutched in Mara's hand. "She asked for help," I said quietly, "and she damn well got it." The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness. As I stepped deeper behind the abandoned storage units at the edge of the truck stop, the night felt heavier here, like the cold air itself was warning me to turn back. My boots scraped against the cracked pavement, echoing in a space that should have been silent. Every instinct in my body told me Mia's note hadn't been a cry for help. It had been a countdown, and I was running out of time. A rusted door creaked nearby, and I swung the beam toward it. The metal surface was dented, stained as if someone had slammed their anger into it more than once. A faint sound leaked through the gaps. Soft breathing, muffled, shaky. It wasn't the breath of a grown man. It was too small, too fragile. I stepped closer, heart thundering, and whispered, "Mia." The breathing hitched, then a tiny whimper slipped through the cracks, a sound so faint it might have been mistaken for wind if I hadn't been listening with every nerve in my body. I crouched down beside the door, pressing my hand against the cold metal. "It's okay," I murmured softly. "I'm here. I found your note. I'm not leaving without you." For a moment, there was nothing but trembling silence. Then the smallest voice answered, "He said he'd come back. He said, he always comes back." The terror in her tone gripped my spine. This wasn't just a man chasing someone. This was a predator who had carved fear into her bones. I tried the handle. Locked, of course. Not industrial, not reinforced. Just a cheap utility lock someone had forced shut. I braced my shoulder against the door and pushed, feeling the metal bite against my jacket. Nothing. I pushed again, harder, muscles tightening as the frame groaned. "Mia, step back for me," I whispered. "I'm getting you out." She didn't answer, but I heard movement, a small shift backward that told me she trusted me enough to try. I pulled back, inhaling the freezing air deep into my lungs, grounding myself in the moment. Then I slammed my shoulder into the door with everything I had. Pain jolted through my arm, but the lock cracked just slightly. Another hit, a louder crack. I pushed my boots into the ground, felt the earth anchor me, and threw myself into one final strike that ripped the door open with a scream of bending metal. Mia stood inside, curled into herself, cheeks stained with tears and dust. Her hair was tangled, her clothes torn, and her knees were scraped like she'd been dragged or had fallen trying to escape. She looked up at me with eyes wide enough to hold the whole night inside them. But when she saw it was me, when she recognized the same man who'd read her note with trembling fingers moments ago, something in her expression cracked, fear shifting into fragile relief. She reached for me before she even stood up, her hand shaking as she grabbed my sleeve. "Don't let him find us," she whispered. "Not me, us." I wrapped my jacket around her shoulders and pulled her into my arms, lifting her with a gentleness the night didn't deserve. "He won't," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Not while you're with me, not tonight, not ever again." The police cars peeled out of the truck stop and disappeared into the long, empty stretch of highway, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the chaos before it. The night air settled slowly, like dust after a storm, drifting through the space where fear had lived only minutes earlier. I stood alone beside my rig, the neon lights flickering faintly above me, painting the gravel with cold flashes of blue and pink. My breath formed small clouds in the air, each one carrying the weight of the moment I had just survived, and the life I had helped save. I opened my truck door and sank into the driver's seat, the leather creaking softly beneath me. The cab still held the faint warmth of Emma's presence, the echo of her shaking breaths lingering in the air. It felt wrong to start the engine right away, as if the truck itself needed a moment to steady after witnessing everything that had unfolded beside it. My fingers brushed against the crumpled note she'd slipped through my door hours earlier, now torn at the corner, smudged with dirt and tears. 4 words, 4 lifelines. Help us before he finds us. I held the note for a long moment, feeling the texture of her desperation pressed into the paper. That tiny piece of torn notebook had been her last hope, and somehow through the chaos, the fear, the chase in the dark, she had survived long enough to be heard. The thought tightened my chest and sent a shiver down my spine, not from the cold, but from the realization of how close she came to being swallowed by the night forever. The engine finally rumbled awake, its familiar growl cutting through the quiet like a heartbeat returning after a long pause. I rested my hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the empty lot. The world looked the same, but I didn't. Nights like this change a man. They carve you deeper, make you realize how fragile people are, how strong they pretend to be, and how easily darkness can take someone if nobody steps in. And on nights like this, you learn that sometimes you're the only one standing between someone's worst nightmare and their chance to breathe again. As I eased the truck forward, the headlights washed over the tire tracks in the gravel, the scattered footprints leading back to where Emma had been hiding, pressed tight between the wheels, trying to make herself invisible. The memory hit me like a cold wave, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with terror, her hands gripping my jacket like the world was falling out from under her, and then her relief when she realized she wasn't alone anymore, that she had found someone who would stand between her and the man who had stolen her life piece by piece. The highway stretched out in front of me, long and dark, the kind of road that swallows sound and keeps secrets better than people do. I pulled onto the asphalt, letting the hum of the tires settle my thoughts. The night wasn't over. Not for me, not for anyone who carried stories like this inside their bones. Somewhere out there, another cry would one day echo through the shadows, another plea for help, another note, another whisper, another life hanging by a thread. And when that moment came, I knew I'd be there, because walking away had never been an option. The cab warmed slowly as I drove, and for the first time since the chaos began, the cold loosened its grip on my shoulders. I let out a long breath, the kind that feels like it carries pieces of you with it, the kind that reminds you you're still alive, the kind that tells you the night may be dark but you're not done yet, not even close. The officers searched the abandoned motel room with flashlights sweeping across peeling walls, broken furniture, and a single mattress on the floor. Every detail felt wrong, too quiet, too prepared, too empty. I stayed outside with Claire, watching her grip the blanket around her shoulders like it was the only thing still keeping her together. Her eyes kept drifting back to my truck, where her little brother sat waiting, still trembling, still silent, still afraid that the world outside the cab wanted to swallow him whole. She kept replaying everything in her mind, every threat, every footstep, every breath that man took behind her in the dark. I could see it in the way her jaw clenched, in the way her nails dug into her palms. Trauma leaves imprints long after bruises fade. "He'll come back," she whispered. "He always comes back." I stepped closer, making sure she saw the truth in my eyes. "Not tonight," I said. "Not after that note. Not after everything you did to survive." When the officers returned, their faces carried the same tension that had been crawling across my spine since this started. They'd found signs of someone staying there, food wrappers, blankets, tools, but no sign of him. It confirmed what I already feared. He was still out there, watching, waiting, circling like a vulture that wouldn't rest until he reclaimed what he believed belonged to him. Claire's knees buckled slightly, and I steadied her before she could fall. Her breath shook with each inhale, like even air hurt now. A distant engine echoed down the empty road, slow, creeping, deliberate. Every head turned toward the sound. The night seemed to thicken, tightening around us as headlights cut through the fog. Claire's entire body froze. Her lips parted in a silent plea. That wasn't just fear, it was recognition. The car rolled closer, tires crunching over wet gravel, the engine dragging heavily like the breath of a monster waking up. My fists tightened. The officers reached for their radios. Claire took one shaky step backward. The car stopped halfway into the lot, idling, lights glaring toward us but revealing nothing inside. Then the driver's door cracked open, slowly, deliberately, like whoever was inside wanted us to feel every second of dread. Claire whispered, "That's him." The words barely made it past her lips, but they were enough to turn my blood cold, enough to send a current of fury burning through my veins, enough to make me take a step forward before anyone else did. The door swung open fully and a silhouette stepped out. Tall, broad, movements calm in a way that felt predatory. He didn't rush, he didn't hide. He just stared at us from across the foggy lot like he was choosing which of us to break first. Claire whimpered behind me, her fingers clutching the back of my jacket. I could feel her shaking through the fabric, feel her fear beating like a second heartbeat against my spine. I positioned myself in front of her without thinking, grounding my boots into the gravel as if the earth itself needed to hold me still. The man took one slow step forward, then another. The fog swallowed half of his body, but his voice cut through it clean and sharp. She has something that belongs to me. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a threat. It was a claim, a declaration from someone who believed ownership was the same thing as love. I stepped forward, letting the cold breath of the night fill my lungs, steady my voice, sharpen my resolve. She doesn't belong to you, I said. Not tonight. Not ever again. When the dust finally settled and the patrol cars sped down the highway with Marcus in the back seat, the night exhaled as if it had been holding its breath since the moment that note slid through my door. I stood beside my truck, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had almost happened. The cold air stung my face, mixing with the lingering heat of adrenaline. Behind me, Riley clung to her mother, Ava, their silhouettes trembling under the glow of the truck's headlights like two souls learning how to breathe again. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe too. Ava approached me slowly, her steps fragile but deliberate, like each one reclaimed a piece of herself she thought she'd lost forever. There was fear in her eyes still, but gratitude flickered beneath it, shining through bruises and exhaustion. She touched my arm with a hand that shook but didn't hesitate. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice thin, almost carried away by the wind. I didn't answer right away. The truth was heavier than the words. I hadn't saved them. I'd simply shown up when no one else did. Sometimes, that's all a person needs. Riley peeked out from behind her mother's leg, eyes swollen from crying but brighter than before, like hope had found a spot to sit inside her again. She stepped closer, holding the crumpled note she'd used to reach me. "I didn't know if it would work," she murmured, "but I thought maybe someone good would read it." Her voice cracked, and she hugged the paper to her chest. I felt something in me shift. A note that could have blown away in the wind had changed the entire course of a night, and 2 lives. She didn't know it, but her courage had done more than mine ever could. I walked them to the second patrol car, the one the officers had warmed up for them, blankets waiting in the back seat. The headlights turned the mist to gold, wrapping the 3 of us in a glow that felt strangely peaceful after everything. Ava paused before getting inside, her hand gripping the frame of the door. "We don't have anyone else," she said softly, "but tonight you made us feel like we did." Her words sat heavy in my chest, settling into the space where the loneliness of the road usually lived. I nodded once. Words would have fallen short. As the car rolled away, Riley pressed her palm to the window. A silent goodbye I felt deep in my bones. I raised my hand in return, watching their taillights fade into the dark stretch of the highway until they were gone completely. The world grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that follows storms and revelations. I turned back to my truck, its chrome reflecting the last flickers of the night, and climbed into the cab with a weight I couldn't quite name. The seat felt different now, carrying echoes of fear, hope, and the fragile trust of a little girl who'd believed I could help. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar sound that usually carried me forward without second thoughts. But tonight I stayed still a moment longer, letting the road settle into my bones. Some nights remind you of the darkness people hide behind their smiles. Others remind you of why you keep going, why you stay awake behind the wheel long after exhaustion claws at your spine. And some nights like this remind you that the world is full of people who need someone to stand between them and the things that hunt them in the dark. If you stayed with me through this story, then you understand why voices like Ava's and Riley's can't go unheard, why stories like this matter, and why someone has to be there when the night turns cruel. So before you go, hit the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who might need them most. Subscribe if you want to ride with me again, because the road ahead is long, full of lives crossing paths with fate at the quietest hours. I'll keep telling these stories. I'll keep showing up, and if you're willing, climb in. There are more miles waiting for us.